Welcome to today's presentation on the anatomy of the spinal cord, looking at the gross anatomy, cross-sectional anatomy, and neuronal pathways. My name is Dr. Sharyn Carnahan, and I will be doing this presentation. The objectives and outcomes of this presentation, we're going to be looking at an overview of the anatomy and spinal cord and an overview of the neuronal pathways arising from the spinal cord. Firstly, though, we're going to have a quick look at the nervous system, which comprises of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The CNS includes the brain and the spinal cord, which is what we're going to be concentrating on today. PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, includes all the neural tissue outside the CNS and provides the communication connection between the spinal cord, brain, and the rest of the body. And this includes the cranial nerves and the major plexes, which we'll be discussing later. First up, we're going to be looking at the gross anatomy of the spinal cord. So this occupies the vertebral column in an epidural space. It's a network of sensory and motor nerves, and together these nerves form a strong, firm cord-like structure. It extends from the foramen magnum in the cranium, which is the big hole in the cranium, to the conus medullaris around the L1 vertebrae in adults and down into the sacrum in children. The spinal cord has a number of sections. So we're looking at the cervical enlargement here, which is around the C3 to T2 region, and the lumbar enlargement around here between L1 and S3. This is due to the extremities, such as the arms and the legs, due to the increased number of neurons that are being fed into the spinal cord. The next section is the conus medullaris, which tapers down at the lower end of the spinal cord around the L1, L2. It's not very well defined at that upper end. At the lower end of that, we then have the cauda equina, and if you know your Latin, that means horse's tail, because this branches off in the lumbar and sacral regions like a horse's tail. And finally, at the terminal end, we have the filum terminale, or the terminal thread. This is a delicate strand of fibrous tissue around 20 centimetres long, and it goes from the apex of the conus medullaris to the coccyx. We then have 5 groups of spinal cords that are found in 31 pairs. So we have 8 pairs of cervical nerves from C1 to C8, 12 pairs of thoracic nerves, 5 pairs of lumbar nerves from L1 to L5, the sacral nerves, there's 5 pairs of those, and 1 pair of coccygeal nerves. All of them are mixed nerves, so they're both motor and sensory. All of these nerves form plexes, except for those that are the intercostal nerves here in the thoracic region. The plexes are branching networks of the intersecting nerves. So they come out, for example, they come out of the cervical section and form a network that then moves down into the various parts of the body. Further down, we have the lumbar plexus, same sort of thing, networking of nerves coming out and then filling in to various parts of the body. So next up, we're going to have a look at a cross section. So if we have a look at the various sections from the cervix through the thoracic area down to the lumbar enlargement and around the lumbar region, we can see that each of these cross sections are slightly different. They all have the same format, just slightly different from the cranium down to the terminal end of the spinal cord. So looking at this cross-section of the spinal cord, we can see that it's found in 2 equal parts that has an incomplete division through the centre. That these two parts are joined by grey matter and white matter. So, and these are supported by neuroglia, which maintain homeostasis, provide strength, myelin sheaths. The neuroglia are non-neuronal cells. At the front, we can see that there's an anterior median fissure. This is only short and shallow, whereas at the posterior side, we have a deep, narrow septum, and this is called the posterior median sulcus. The spinal cord is there covered in 3 layers of meninges for protection, similar to the brain. So we have the dura mater, a thinner arachnoid layer, and then the pia mater. So having a closer look at a cross section, so we're looking at a transverse section of the thoracic spinal cord here. We have the commissaire, which is, there's both grey, which is the section that joins the 2 grey matters together, and the white commissaire, which is joining the 2 halves. Both of those join the 2 halves together. We then have the horns. We have a dorsal horn and anterior horn. These are where the sensory neurons enter and synapse with the associate motor neurons. This lateral horn here is only visible in T1 and T2, and this contains autonomic neuron cell bodies. Once we look further, we have these small rootlets that are coming out of the spinal cord that join together to form the nerve roots. And the posterior or dorsal root has a ganglion on it. These ganglions are structures of a number of nerve cell bodies that are linked by synapse, and they form a swelling on the nerve tissue or on the nerve fibre. There's also the anterior root as well. So these spinal nerve roots, each spinal nerve connects into the spinal cord via 2 roots. The ventral roots, which contain the motor or efferent fibres that come from the ventral horn motor neurons, and these fibres innervate the skeletal tissues. The dorsal roots, they contain the sensory or afferent fibres, and they carry impulses from the peripheral receptors up into the spinal cord and then into the higher bodies, such as the pons and medulla in the brain. The neuron bodies are in these dorsal root ganglia, as said earlier. So in this diagram, we have the sensory receptors in the blue going up into the spinal cord, and the red motor neurons returning to the neuromuscular junction in the muscles. These neuronal pathways are a series of connected nerves along which the electrical impulses travel in the body. So we have 2 different divisions. We have the sensory or afferent division. So they're the neurons that carry the information to the CNS. We have somatic and visceral sensory nerves, and then in the efferent neurons or the motor neurons, they're the ones that carry the impulses away from the CNS back to the effector muscles and glands. We have the somatic section, which is voluntary and consciously controls the skeletal muscles or the autonomic ones, which control smooth and cardiac muscles. So the last section that we're going to look at is the neuronal pathways. So we have ascending tracts, which are the afferent tracts, and descending tracts, which are the efferent tracts. So in these diagrams, we have the ascending ones are the blue, so the afferent tracts are the blue, and the efferent tracts, which are coming away from the spinal cord, are in the red. So the ascending tracts, so they're taking fibres ascending from the spinal cord to the higher centres of the pons and the medulla and the cerebrum. These conduct the afferent information such as pain, temperature, touch. They all consist of 3 neurons, so first order, second order and third order neurons, and all the second order neurons decussate, which means they send the fibre to the opposite side of the cord. So quick look at the individual tracts. So we have the spinothalamic tract. There's a dorsal and ventral component to these. The dorsal one takes pain and temperature sensors to the neurons, and the ventral takes crude touch and pressure. Meanwhile, the dorsal white column deals with the localized fine touch, vibration and proprioception. This is separated into 2 separate sections, the facilis cunatus here, which is the upper body, so the neck, the arms and the trunk, and the fascia gracilis is the legs and the trunk, so the lower part of the body. This next one is the spinocerebellar tract. This synapse is in Clark's nucleus within the spinal cord. Goes from T1 to L3, and then sometimes there's some in L4 to S3, which is called the rostral tract. This tract works with the proprioception of the Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles. And just to note, the dorsal terminates on the same side of the cerebellum, whereas the ventral tract is ipsilateral or on the opposite side of the cerebellum. So it crosses over the spinal cord. And onto the descending tracts. So these are the fibres that are descending from the spinal cord, and they conduct the efferent information to the motor neurons. 2 types, there's pyramidal and extrapyramidal. So these are these red ones that we're going to be looking at here and here. They are same on both sides. So we've got the corticospinal tract, which looks at the voluntary, discrete, skilled motor control of the body and limbs. It goes up to the cerebral cortex through primary motor and somatosensory areas to the motor neurons and interneurons in the spinal cord. The lateral corticospinal tract is about 80%. It crosses the midline in the spinal cord and controls the opposite limbs and digits to the side that's on. The ventral tract is around 20%, and it controls the same side of the body, and it controls the trunk. The reticulospinal tract works with the other motor pathways, coordinates control of movement, integrates information, and there's 2 sections, once again, lateral and the medial. They inhibit excitatory, axial, or excite the extensor muscles. The rubrospinal tract, vestibulospinal tract, and the tectospinal tract all deal with the gross and fine motor control of the upper limbs, head and eye coordination, upright posture and balance, and mediate reflex of the postural movement of the head. So just a quick overview of the spinal cord and neuronal pathways within it. So summary of the key points, we have the anatomy and functional divisions of the spinal cord and the neuronal pathways. Thank you very much for listening.